writing begins, planning your draft, what do? You've got your all your sources. You've got your template for with filled with all the notes that you've taken. How do you begin? Well, first of all, sketch some background information. So talk about perhaps what your researcher role is, what you hope to gain here, who you're addressing, why the topic is important today, etc. Right? So that's kind of background information. Then you want to define some key terms. So this is where your key terms are going to come in. Why these key terms are important for this paper, and particularly if they're going to be used in a kind of technical sense. And also, that's important. Make sure. Another reason why you want to define your key terms here is if you've got words that you're going to use in a technical sense, then this is where you want to define them so that your audience is with you right from the beginning. But also, you want to make sure that you're always using the same terms in the same way throughout the entire piece, through your whole paper or through your whole thesis. Nothing's worse than realizing that by the end of your paper, by the end of your thesis, you've started using different terms to refer to a specific idea, or you've started using the same terms but in different ways, right? Then you've got to go back and revise the entire thing. So right from the start, make sure that you know exactly what terms you're going to use, how you're going to define them, and you're always going to use those terms in those ways, okay? And if you define them for your reader too at this point, then that's a big help for them also. And then determine what your major sections and or chapters are going to be. If you're obviously writing a thesis, you're going to have chapters. If it's just a paper, divide it into major sections and figure out how those key terms are going to spread out through all of those sections, okay? Develop a logical order for the sections, and this will, in some sense be connected to how your argument is going to unfold, right? Break down the sections into subsections, and there's nothing wrong at all. There's nothing wrong with, in the very physical writing of your paper to have, very visible subheadings, headings and subheadings, right? Maybe you want to put your headings of your major sections in bold, and maybe you want to put your subheadings in bold italic or something like that, right? Make sure that each section or subsection is clearly demarcated where it begins and ends. And as I mentioned, you can use headings and subheadings in the paper itself, and that helps your reader too, right? Don't just go from paragraph to paragraph, but put the headings, no problem at all. It helps your reader figure out what the organization of the paper is. And this is very important. Determine where you're going to include source engagement, right? So as you're, planning your draft, write down, what all the sections are going to be and figure out where you're going to use all your sources. Okay, so in this section, I've got to engage this author. In this other section, I've got to engage this author. And in order to figure out that, go back to what we talked about in the first video, how you categorized your notes. Okay, which authors here support my arguments? Which authors contradict my arguments? How am I going to use them? Which sections am I going to fit them into, right? So maybe you've got a section of your paper just responding to possible criticisms of your argument. So you're going to put those authors in that section. Then you've got some authors, you had in your categorization, you've got some sources that help to sketch out the background. Well, okay, that you're going to deal with that in the background section, like that, right? So the template that you use to take notes and the categorization of your notes is going to help you greatly. If you do that in great detail, then it's going to help you greatly in planning your draft. Then now you're writing. The writing is continuing. Once you've got your draft, and another thing about the draft is don't think of it as if it's carved in stone, right? Because as you write, you're gonna realize that maybe the writing itself is a process of thinking that sometimes brings to light ideas that you hadn't planned on in the draft itself. So maybe you've got to revise the draft a little as you write. That's fine. Okay, that's perfectly fine. So, be ready for that. But you want to engage your sources creatively as you're writing. Okay, so look for areas of creative disagreement and creative agreement. So how can you be creative in your disagreement? How can you be creative in your agreement? Well, something like this. So your author is D. D's argument misses something. It misses this point. Right? So add that in. D's argument got something wrong, needs correcting. D's argument assumes too much, makes too big of a leap. And then areas of creative agreement. D's argument can be expanded. Its assumptions can be given support. So maybe something was speculated about in D's argument, but you found some information to fill in that speculation, right? Or how about this? D's argument can be applied to this new or different context, right? So you want to engage your sources in these creative ways. Another thing that's very important, this is going to be more relevant to thesis writing. In a master's thesis, you are generally not required to, obviously it's encouraged, but you're not required to make an original contribution to the field. In a PhD thesis, you certainly are required to make this original contribution. A lot of times, an original contribution might just be something like, well, I'm going to take D's argument and I'm going to apply it to this new context. We can think of this new thing. We can think of this thing in a different way by taking D's argument and putting it in a different context, right? But obviously, if you want to do that in a master's thesis as well, that's perfectly fine also.